field research in Libya. And the name of the report, Countering Violent Extremism in Libya, a Peacebuilding Perspective, authored by one of our panelists here, Dr. Talha Köse. Let me introduce this panelist here. As I introduced Dr. Talha Köse, he's a senior researcher at SETA Istanbul at the strategy department, and he is also a chair. He is also the chair of the political science and international relations department at Ibn Haldun University. And the other panelists, Dr. Kerim Mizran. He's the director of North Africa Initiative and he's the resident senior fellow at Atlantic Council's Rafiq Hariri Center for the Middle East. Once again, thank you very much for coming here. We will first listen to Dr. Talha Köse. We will listen to his initial remarks, his findings, and his presentation of his report, and then we will discuss about the outcome of this report. Okay, please.
Okay. Thank you, Hassan. So it's great to be here at Washington SETA, which I have been a long time ago as a research director, and it's also a pleasure to be with an expert on Libya, Mr. Kerim Mezran. So my presentation, so we haven't published the report yet. I mean, we have conducted field research. We have an idea. We still need some feedback. We are engaging with the, local actors and some international stakeholders as well. But overall, my expertise is not Libya. I mean, my initial effort is more on peace building and how this approach is appropriate for the region. So as we started to research Libya, we find some commonalities with the Libya's experience in some other cases like maybe Yemen, Iraq. So I think there are, these commonalities are very important for overall shape of the region. So, the problem of violent extremism is often used or abused in the literature and about the discussion in the Middle East and North Africa. So I think the first thing we need to do is to engage a little bit more critically with this subject and how this subject has been used, abused, and instrumentalized by some of the local actors in the region. So we have to engage with this issue, the notion of violent extremism more critically. So what we did was mostly our research. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to get into the eastern part of the country, Benghazi, but we had opportunity to talk many of the stakeholders, former military people, intelligence people, politicians. We had a chance to go to Tripoli, Misrata, Zintan, Zlitan, and talk to people, some civil society activists, journalists, and people in the region. And also, we invited some of them to Istanbul and Ankara, and we did some focus group workshops. So our report is based on these experiences as well as our friends who have field experience in Libya. But as I said, I think we have to problematize the notion of violent extremism in Libya. So now we have the myth of violent extremism. I think I divide it into three ways to engage with the violent extremism. Myth of violent extremism, the reality of the violent extremism in Libya, and the potential for violent extremism. I think we have to deal with those issues, together. So our report is not about the myth of violent extremism, how to address the reality of violent extremism in Libya, and also how to deal with the potential of the violent extremism, which we think is a serious issue. So what is done after these revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa is, so some of the actors in the region instrumentalized the idea of violent extremism and put all the Islamist actors or local actors that are somehow affiliated with the Islamist politics as the violent extremist actors. So then they thought they presented this as, the source of chaos and destabilization in the region, and they try to suppress popular processes and democratic processes by use of violent extremism. So any actor, any civilian actor, any militia that are somehow affiliated with the Islamist groups in the field have been tagged as violent extremism groups, and especially Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt after the coup instrumentalized this discourse of violent extremism. I think this is what they aimed with the instrumentalization of the violent extremism is that they wanted to put a strong military-oriented person in the government, suppress social grassroots level activism, as well as completely wipe out the Islamist politics. This is a dangerous situation because when you wipe out the popular movements, the only way you demonstrate, you show them is the violence. So I think their approach, the myth of violent extremism or instrumentalization of the violent extremism is very dangerous situation, and this didn't really bring stability. So one of the reasons why some violent extremism groups such as Ansar al-Sharia emerged in Libya is lack of any potential for political engagement, political process, or civil society activism. So this, I think the idea of the notion of violent extremism is expanded, and still those actors provide the reason for their involvement in Libya with the pretext of violent extremism. For instance, we know that Egypt and UAE is still engaged strongly, and even some actors like France use some of these arguments, and they think this is convincing argument. So I think we have to engage very critically with this myth of violent extremism. The second one is the reality of violent extremism on the ground in Libya. Yes, the country is fragmented. There are autonomous pockets for extremist groups, especially tribal groups have their autonomy. We have ISIS still remaining in Libya, Sirte, and they have potential for, especially in the southern parts of the country, and some other extremist groups are weak but have some potential. So, but the ongoing civil war and bombardment of the Haftar forces and killing of the innocent civilians is creating more people who are more willing to engage with extremism or joining the militias. So we have the problem of ongoing proxy war. So UAE, Egypt, Saudis, French backed the Haftar forces. Turkey, together with Qatar, is supporting the Tripoli government. And former regime loyalists are still playing around. So they try to find new opportunities. And also autonomous, the tribes has their autonomy. Whoever plays stronger within this game, the civil war, they can get closer to them. And also, if the country, if the system fragments, then this ongoing civil war really reduces the state potential, state capacity, and may lead longer-term, structural issues. So, yes, we have a serious issue of violent extremism. One of the reasons behind this violent extremism is civil war and the weakness of the state, but some actors who instrumentalize violent extremism really lead to emergence of violent extremism. And as the grievances increase with the ongoing civil war, I think the potential is highly. And also, the real issue we engage is the potential for violent extremism and its consequences, not only for the Europe, but for the entire region. So, in the eastern part of the country, we have the Haftar and his backers, and in the west, we have the GNA and parliament. And also in the southern part, we have tribes and some pocket areas for, extremist groups or tribal, or some networks of crime. So I think if civil war continues, this fragmentation may become the usual thing. So fragile state may even turn into more fragile. The Libya may not protect the territories. It may turn into a transit place for sub-Saharan African migration and also some breeding ground for more extremist groups from Sahel region to other parts of the region, and also availability of weapons and increased, abundance of the weapons is also an important issue for Libya, and those Libya may turn into black market for weapons. So, and also, lots of actors are betting for General Haftar for stabilization, but he's, old and he doesn't leave behind the institutional legacy. So even if he, wins the war, which is unlikely, but after him, I think there's also potential for chaos in the country. And the other issue is, the instability in Libya may also spread to Mediterranean, influence Mediterranean security, and also this, availability of natural resources in Libya is also some opportunity for all the extremist actors and the neighboring countries. So this proxy war may turn into a regional war. So there is huge potential. So from proxy to real war, availability of natural resources, fragmentation of the country, and turning into transit migration issue, migration space is a possibility. So for now, they are betting, especially important international actors are betting for Haftar, but I think this is a very dangerous situation. So potential for extremism is higher in the country. So there are certain continuities from Gaddafi time to today. I think when we are dealing with the problem of violent extremism, there are certain continuities. So weak state capacity is one of the major fundamental issues. Weak formal institutions. So Gaddafi really left behind weak state capacity and weak institutions. Weak sense of national loyalty. So although there is idea of Libyanness, but the tribal ties and the other ties are much stronger in comparison to that. Weak civil society. So the only existing civil society are somehow related to tribes, and weak experience of democracy, and also again the idea of strongman like the Gaddafi. They have this legacy. And fragmented, tribal loyalties, which may also turn into a broader competition. So, and also, if you look at from the positive side, so there is a weak institutional capacity, weak civil society, weak state capacity, fragmentation, and weak national consciousness to bring the country together. So the positive sides, I mean, there are also, in comparison to the other cases like Iraq and Yemen, Libya has some advantages. So when we look at so their understanding of religion is moderate understanding of religion, which is closer to more Sufi understanding. Although with the emergence of Madkhali Salafis, there is some transformation, especially in the eastern part of the country, but still moderate Islamic understanding have strong roots in Libya. And also relatively ethnically homogeneous society with Arabic as their language, which is very important for formation of national consciousness, highly urbanized and highly literate, so which is another important advantage of Libya. And tribal solidarities help to reduce some social and economic problems. So although tribal ties may have some negative influences for the formation of national consciousness, but still it provides some security in the local context and provides some social economic benefits. And there are certain, things that are not clear for the future of Libya. So, whether it's good or bad. So, abundance of natural resources, definitely. So, we know that in the civil wars, existence of natural resources always some kind of, some kind of opportunity for extremists and some, militias. So, it is good that Libya may recover economically, but it is also at the same time an incentive for new civil wars. And also, economy is not diversified, unfortunately. It's based on natural resources. Libya has been isolated from the world economy for a long time. So during the Gaddafi period, this is a very negative thing. So, which means also there is a huge potential. So Libya has not been integrated. If it is used in a positive direction, there is a potential. But unfortunately, for the time being, it's not, the resource of Libya has not been integrated and it's not be part of the manufacturing. And also no unifying ideology or national narrative, what we find. I think, so yes, being against the Gaddafi, being against some actors, maybe some form of solidarity, but this is not a positive thing. So what can we move from here? So what are the scenarios for the, violent extremism, dealing with the issue of violent extremism for Libya? Of course, there are certain scenarios. So some actors have the idea of the success for Haftar. So it's a kind of building stability with the top-down approach, with the strong man. So the similar approach in Egypt, similar approach in many countries. So smashing the social popular unrest, putting democratic institutions under the control, securitizing the entire system, providing stability for some external investors, and also putting limitations to all these actors who may have potential for insurgency, and providing non-political discourse among the people through maybe Salafi teachings. So, of course, this will not be preferable option for Europe because this will really lead to emergence of new, smaller kind of extremist groups with the grievances. And this may also increase the migration, since opportunities will be limited in Libya. This may also push further migration. It will increase, economic and political stability. But again, some actors in the region are selling this discourse. So putting strongmen in the Libya and dealing with the all extremist groups along these lines, which is offered, but this, I think, will not bring stability in the long run, and it will turn something like the second, Gaddafi, and this will also increase and deepen the civil war, because we know that Misrata, Tripoli, and people in other parts of the country is against this discourse. So even we know that the western part of the country was very fragmented along different militia groups and tribes, but with the Haftar's attack in April, I think those groups started to come together to a certain extent, because they didn't want to have second, Gaddafi. The second option or second scenario is if Haftar fails. Of course, there is no very positive prospect here as well, because we know that international actors are still backing them. So the country will be de facto fragmented. So there will be, a different order in the eastern part of the country and different order in the western part of the country, where in the east, Madkhali Salafis strongman order will continue, and probably Egypt, UAE, and some other international actors will be very active in this part. So they will have contradictions in the oil sales. And Haftar is unlikely to put sustainable order in that part. The other parts of the country will probably be parliamentarian semi-democracy, which may come together around the tribal allegiances, but still, because of this fragmentation, the issue of security will predominate in the western part of the country, and we cannot exactly see huge potential economic development in that part. So this is the case where Haftar fails. Of course, the best option is UN-supported peace process. I think without the peace process, even if the civil war continues with the success or the failure of the Haftar, I think we don't see positive prospects. So what we presumed, what we really supported in our argument in our report is UN-supported peace and reconciliation process, because the country is very much fragmented. The polarization is increasing. A new order is emerging, and also we know that Libya is a tribal country, and these revenge politics will be very important. As the number of people die, this will turn into a larger feud in the country. So reducing the deaths, reducing the battle, and reducing the number of the militias is very important. And we know that major actors are part of this struggle. I mean, France, Russia is part of the struggle, and US is very important because has leverage on Saudi Arabia and UAE, even in Turkey. And unfortunately, they don't want to touch and just watch, give some credit to Haftar. If he probably fails, they will intervene. But at this time, it will be much more difficult to bring country together and deal with the problem of revenge politics. So there are definitely certain obstacles for the normalization along these lines. We know that Sarraj seems to be a weak political figure to consolidate the entire country. So this is still the people, some groups in the western part of the country does not complete the bet on Sarraj. Military capacity of the Tripoli coalition is also weak, depends on the Misrata. So Misrata militias are important, and there are some problems among the militias. Also, militia business is very lavish business. Militias will try to continue their advantages, so it will be very difficult to bring them together under the state-making procedure. So they will want to continue their advantageous position, and Haftar doesn't have understanding of a political process, inclusive political process. I think nobody really tried to bring the idea to him, even if he's part of the political process. Even if he loses his CH, that's the other issue. And also, UN Security Council members have different ideas. So France, US just try to watch the situation. Unfortunately, there are certain decisions, Security Council resolutions, but they don't really want to act on it. So what we did, So what we did in our report is, so there are from the alternatives for the intervention countering violent extremism. So one approach definitely is a strongman approach, putting order, top-down changing, institutionalization, and dealing with all the security perspective. And other perspective is more of a liberal perspective. It's more civil society, economy-oriented perspective. And ours is more of a peace-building perspective, which is more creating resilient social background. I think so.
You can zoom in. The other one.
Diğerini açabiliriz. So what we did was to So what we have seen is that, especially in our field research, in many cases, we have recognized that there is a very weak support and belief in government, military, and all the actors. And most of our, stakeholders, most of the people on the ground accuse, especially from the western part of the country, Madkhali Salafis. So how can we transform the country from the bottom-up perspective, rather than dealing with the issue of direct violence? So the top-down strongman approach focuses on the direct violence. However, we have to get into underlying dynamics based on inclusive process with the local ownership and also strengthening the local actors. So it will be, yes, I mean, a top-down approach may seem much easier, much faster, but in terms of long-term, I think it will be very difficult to maintain this, especially in a country very fragmented along tribal lines in Libya. So what we recommended in the report was to strengthen you know, so our approach is So our approach is a combination of state building, nation building, and peace building. So state building approach usually is more top-down perspective, focused on security institutions. Nation building approach is very important because the basis of our approach is strengthening the national consciousness, education, creation of an inclusive notion of Libyanness, and creating common shared values so that the state building perspective will be based on these premises, and also deliverance, delivering some of the basic, goods, basic services, but by the state. So rather than imposing security-oriented stabilization effort, what we offered is the nation building plus, so with the sense of consciousness. So we give detailed account of civil society, youth, education activities, as well as providing of economic opportunities through SMEs, small and medium enterprises, providing certain services by authorities and gaining legitimacy through providing all these services, and then engaging with the people and bringing the legitimacy of the state on the basis of nation building and providing the resources. So all the report gives detailed accounts of how we can do this in the local context. One major problem for Libya is the geographic fragmentation of country, lack of lack of trained people, and also due to legacy of the authoritarianism, the horizontal ties between the people along the country is very weak. So you have to, we have to strengthen the horizontal ties, some communication ties, some institutional ties, so that they will be both able to communicate as well as do business and politics along these lines. So all the recommendations are based on increasing horizontal ties between the people rather than putting more top-down. Also increasing the government's potential for providing of the resources with the inclusion, as well as increasing sense of consciousness. So one issue is we definitely need to deal with the problem of security sector reform. So there is a separate report, but security sector reform without providing some legitimacy, without engaging through national dialogue and creating some sense of trust among the actors, it will be very difficult to collect the weapons. I think one important dimension and very important element of peace building in Libya is to create comprehensive national dialogue process. There are earlier efforts, humanitarian dialogue, and with the support of the United Nations. I think it will be very important central element of countering violent extremism in order to collect the weapons, in order to create sense of commonness, and in order to deal with all these structural problems. I think starting from the local to, in general, broader national dialogue is very important. Otherwise, these grievances and lack of cooperation, lack of communication will be a big obstacle for Libya. So we can probably, if we have questions, we will deal with this issue. Lastly, but not leastly, I think one significant aspect is external intervention into Libya. So we know that Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia on the one hand is influencing, and Turkey is Italy is supporting the legitimate government in Tripoli. But I think without having some consensus. And I think the US is very central here because it has connection with Russia, UAE, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. I think the US has some responsibility, especially engage with external actors to bring forward stabilization effort in the country. Without dealing and without reaching some form of consensus among the external actors, I think it will be unlikely to have stability in the Libya, despite all internal efforts. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Köse, for your remarks, for your presentation. It was really important that you touched upon these issues. It's really important itself to talk about how to identify or how we should approach this problem, which is the violent extremism in Libya. So I'd like to turn to Dr. Mizran for your comments in your remarks about this issue. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And thanks a lot for this presentation, Dr. Köse. You touched almost so many points, so many issues that my head started tilting out. So where do I capture it? From where do we start? The first thing that I think we should understand is that it's true, Libya has never been a united country. If we go back under the Turks, to Wilayat, then the Italian long periods of war, and not until 1934 that Italo Balbo unites Libya into one single, and only for a few years. The king was not interested, once Libya gained independence, was not interested in fostering Libyanness. He was a Sufi sheikh. He was interested in the affairs of his tariqa. He allowed some of the people near him to intermingle in society, but for the vast majority did not do a process of state building, as you define it, nor even of nation building. Gaddafi came in and brought a total different approach. He was, at the beginning, a pan-Arabist. So his idea was, I don't have to build the Libyan state, because if I build the Libyan state, it will be very hard then to annex it to Egypt or to whoever he wanted to. So he maintained weak institutions. There were institutions in Libya, but they were they were weak and kept marginal. He was then pan-Islamist. Whenever it served him, then he became pan-Africanist, then everything except pan-Libyanist. So there was no real movement to a national identity. They would then, after the, whatever you want to call it, the revolution of 2011, the insurgency, the upheavals, whatever you want to call it, Libyans could go back to and say, we have something in common. But at the same time, pragmatically speaking, there has been in the last 30 years 70% urbanization rate. The movement away from tribal divisions, the movement away from tribalism was undergoing. There was an urbanization of the Libyan population that brought, because of the isolation, the emphasis of the regime, a sense of closeness, of Libyanness that is there. I have a problem in denying it entirely. It's not strong, it's not, but it's there. The real problem was what I called the two original sins of the 2011 upheavals, was not recognizing that it was not a revolution of a people against a dictator and few mercenaries. Gaddafi had his consensus. It was the beginning of the initial of a civil war, of a part of a country versus the other side. Why this is important? Not having recognized that made the new elite not thinking about the necessity or the fundamental importance of a national reconciliation conference, agreement, whatever you want to call it, where Libyan from the various parts of society would, in 2011, in 2012, let's put it anyway, meet and lay the foundations of a new state. That would have been fundamental to do. It could have been done. It was not even considered at that point. It took a couple of years under Zidane that you quote Fadel Lamin and other people. I was in that commission started trying to provoke a moment of national dialogue, because we really believe that unless you create a forum, and at the time there was no external influence so big as it is today. At the time, it was still a Libyan affair, with all the exceptions one can make, where you could bring people in, various elites, various groups, and begin the foundation of something that then would have allowed to face elections and the democratization process, not perfectly, but much better, with much stronger foundations than what actually happened. Rushing into elections in 2012 was the biggest mistake, because it crystallized the divisions. At the moment, it was one mistake after the other. Not having asked for help to the foreign powers to disarm the population, because the elite at the time said, no, we can handle it. We don't need NATO to remain. So they pushed NATO away. Then they looked at the militias and they didn't know what to do. So I'll keep it personal. What he did, he paid them. He had the politics of appeasement, where he went there and bribed them in. Bribing them in allowed them to penetrate whatever structure the state was making. So at the certain point, you had the militias that were dividing the head of the interior minister there, the head of the security, all of a sudden, before they even realized it. And the political group who thought that they could maneuverate the militias found that it was the other way around. They had the militias who exercised power on the politicians elected in the agency. That was the cause of the disaster, of the lack of functionality of the agency, and the unraveling of a process for which the polarization is simply a consequence of, because the narrative, if you go back, was already at the beginning. Gaddafi himself was saying the Islamists are going to come and they will take over the country. If we go back to the beginning of the narrative, the Haftar is not new. It was there since the beginning. We went to a large extent to notice that there were not Islamists at the moment of the insurrection in Benghazi at the moment. It was really a spontaneous problem. But because of this narrative, then they started coming in a second moment, thus allowing the other part, the anti-Islamists, whoever you want to define them, to coalesce and then produce Haftar. Haftar is not a Martian. He is a guy that was taken by some Libyan businessmen to the Egyptians who needed a figurehead, a strong man, to lead the stabilization, at least of the eastern part. They were very happy with him. They armed him, they equipped him, they supported him, they sustained him in such a way that he could create the embryo of what later he called the Libyan National Army, start unleashing in early May 2014 this attack against all Islamists, which, parenthetically speaking, it produced the coalescence and the unification of groups that were very divided at that moment. If one thing one has to recognize to the governor of Zidane, that he kept them very separated. He was giving to the Muslim Brotherhood a certain position, was giving to other Islamists a certain other, keeping them very, very separate and practically ineffective in exercising a strong political pressure. The attack of Haftar allowed for the formation of his antithesis, which is the Libya Dawn, who unleashed their attack against the Zintani, who were perceived as being the allies of Haftar, and the destruction of the Tripoli airport, and all that happened in 2012, at the beginning of the polarization of the country. And then the rest is history. The rest is just one mistake after the other. One chance lost after the other, and the intervention stronger and stronger day by day of the foreign powers, to the point that now, and I start from the end of your presentation, the scenarios that we can depict for Libya are really to be determined outside. But now there is a general consensus that unless you reach a decision by the Emirates, the Egyptians, the Qatari, the Turks, the Italians, to sit together and decide, okay, halas, that's all finished. We are not going to intermingle anymore. We tell our proxies that it's time to, and while I'm saying it, I'm fantasizing. that it's time to make peace, that it's time to create a state, because peace is more convenient to us than this situation of war. Until that happens, it will not be resolved in Libya. It will not be resolved because, and you see it, the LNA doesn't have the strength to conquer Tripoli, but they think they do, because they have powers external who are making them believe that they can do it. That's why Haftar decided to enter in Tripoli 10 days before the setting date of the national conference that Salameh was doing, because he knew that if he entered under the agreement of Abu Dhabi into that conference, he would have gotten what he said he wanted, which is head of the army. At that point, he could not, because the agreement was reached among the foreign powers, he could not do anything anymore. He would have been primus inter pares, he would have been the head of a committee, of a national military committee, where he would be the president of this committee, but there would be other figures, Joueli and other persons who were not for him, who would run the army. He knew that if that happened, there was the end of his dream of being the owner of Libya, of being the guy who saved Libya from all Islamist danger and who brought back Libya to civilization. That's why, plus coupled with some misinformation that was fed to him by we know who, he thought that the two brigades he had at his order, Hungarian at the time, could enter in Tripoli easily. Some militias would side with him, he would get there, present the international community with a fait accompli, I'm here, and reach his objective. The militias in Tripoli did not react the way he wanted. Actually, there has been some strange action. For example, the militia led by Haitham Tajouri and some of his people, they were ready to switch to the part of Haftar. It's the foot soldier, it's the single militiaman in that moment who revolted against their commanders and went to fight against Haftar. And this has happened in many other chances. The commanders could not control, because the people were below them, they were Tripolini, they were in their city, they wanted to defend their city, they didn't want an attack from troops from the east coming in, and did not listen to their commander. So they went and they blocked this, and then all that happened. Militias came from Marshafana, militia came from Misurata and the city, and then this stalemate has been created. Haftar called other people. It was the most stupid thing that I ever seen. That's why I don't believe he had any green light from anybody. He really did it on his own. He really thought he could take Tripoli. No Egyptian, no Emirati leader, no one that has a minimum rationality, a minimum knowledge of the situation on the ground would have ever thought it was possible. And in fact, the reaction was one of restraint at the beginning, saying, what the hell is this guy doing? And then once he was perceived being lost, they could not afford him to lose, then they intervened massively and rearmed him. But there is no way to take Tripoli. He took him 2.5 years to take Benghazi, with half of the population of Benghazi on his side, with no international community looking, with no embassy, with nothing. It took him 2 years to take Benghazi, which is 1/10 of Tripoli, and there are embassies, and there are foreigners, and there are 90% of the population is against him. There is no way he can take it, but he can destroy it. That's what we fear the most. Now, the scenarios. I don't see that pessimistically, the idea that Haftar defeated might mean the separation of Libya. There are forces in the eastern part of Libya who are not happy with Haftar. We know that there is malcontent in his troops themselves and in his structure. If he loses and his troops has to withdraw, I believe that there is a high possibility that he is being removed. He might be removed. He loses his face. He cannot stay there. He loses the function of being there. He can be removed. The removal of Haftar by someone that enjoys the support of the same foreign power removes one very important obstacle, which is the veto de facto for any leader of the Tripolitanian side to sit down and talk to him. There is no way, and I've been repeating, that a Fathi Bashaga, a Sarraj, or any other could go now and participate in negotiation with Haftar present. They will go back to Libya and they will be killed. There is not to be underestimated the supreme value of the population, which is revenge. He will not be tolerated. Fathi Bashaga there was a rumor that he went to a meeting with official of Haftar a couple of weeks ago. He had to rush back to Misurata and swear in front of him that he never did that. So just the rumor that he might have was enough to force him to. So there is not going to be any negotiation with Haftar. But Haftar that loses in front of his troop could be removed. If he is removed, you have other people, then every scenario is open. I don't want to be particularly pessimistic, particularly optimistic, but then every scenario is open. You can have more people around the table. You can have the Misrati, the Tripolitanian, the Zintani, but you can have the people from Ashdabia, more people from the east, and create a negotiation which will be then what Salameh says, we have a conference, a national conference. At that point, you can have one that would allow for the creation of a government of national unity, and then so on. Remains, I agree, the problem of the foreign powers. But in this situation, there would be the possibility for the UN and the new government to guarantee what these other powers want. The Egyptians want to work in Libya, want security in the eastern part, and so each one has its own interest. It could be accommodated. Potentially. I'm not saying that this is what is going to happen, but we cannot exclude that. The negotiations of Salameh, the one with Haftar present, in my opinion, are not going to go anywhere. Because there is no way that he can form a national conference with these people at the moment. There's no way you can go to election. That's goes on there. It's really stuck. I agree with him when in the last conference he said we have to force the peace on the Libyan factions by exercising pressure on their proxies, on the foreign country he can try. I'm not sure that at these conditions he will be able to obtain any serious result.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. It's really interesting to listen to the similarities between Gaddafi and Haftar in terms of their narratives.
Haftar is just a bad copy of Gaddafi.
Yeah, good conclusion. And also how he got this position. It's also interesting to listen to that. So, Mr. Köse, if you have any comments or remarks on his presentation, or in his remarks, feel free to respond, please.
I really agree with comments, so I think it's compatible. Yes, I mean, he is a little bit more optimistic, probably coming from having some better insights.
It's what Gramsci used to say: pessimism of the reason, optimism of the will.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that my main concern, my main pessimism is related to the competition between regional actors and global actors. I mean, you have all the fragmentations seen demonstrated in Libya. I mean, disagreement between Turkey, Egypt, UAE. You see disagreement between the US and Russia. France is there. I mean, even Europeans are fragmented among themselves. So this doesn't really end. I mean, the ongoing civil war in Libya is pretty much related to these, proxy competitions. So that's my source of. Otherwise, I mean, Libyan society is very moderate. I mean, they are very much open to dialogue. I have heard lots of things, criticisms about Madkhali Salafism that's brought by external powers. Many, especially the Western, people from the Western side of the country, accuse those extremist ideology, and they think that this is the source of or potential for Libya's, negative thing for the Libya's future. So, but I think, this extremist ideologies, Madkhalism, is gaining ground, and they have some potential, military potential as well. So this is dangerous. So we know that Libya has moderate tradition, moderate historically understanding of Islam, but the spread of these ideologies with the support of external powers and also wiping out all the moderate forces is very dangerous, because we know that moderate version of Islam was not very well institutionalized, and Gaddafi regime wiped out them, limited their activism. So they just let Madkhali Salafis that promoted the idea of loyalty to the ruler live in that context. So I think one important pillar of stabilization in Libya, which we didn't have a chance, is to institutionalize the religious training, religious education, and religious authority, which is very fundamental. I think there needs to be, because most people argue that religion is like the something commodity or something people need. If you cannot find in the market, you find it in the black market. So it's very much available with the money coming from outside, and this ideology, it doesn't necessarily only provide religious understanding, but also some social ties in that context. So I think reinstitutionalizing the moderate Islamic understanding of Libya and limiting those extremist understanding interpretations of Islam is very important for the future of the country, and this needs to be institutionalized through schools, religious training, which were wiped out during the Gaddafi era. So I think this institutionalization is very important. And Libya has some potential leaders, but I think in the long run, this will be the most important, pillar of countering violent extremism strategy. If those rival understandings get into a broader debate, then this will also continue the proxy. Different versions of Islam will compete there with the support of different regional actors. I think that's also if there is no local driven authority, religious authority, then Libya in its understanding and practice of Islam will also be vulnerable to competition of external actors, which will not really help stabilization in Libya.
Even without the foreign actors, remember when they appointed al-Ghariani, that was a very bad choice. They played a very divisive role. And those who were opposed to al-Ghariani, who were part of the Shura, it was led by Arif Nayed and other people, were even worse than. So it's everything goes back to the idea of, unless we have an agreement, political agreement that builds a state that is neutral, that is objectively intent to reconcile Libya, whatever decision is taken, it will be either polarized or will be ineffective.
I see. Thank you very much for your comments again. Let's get to the audience's pessimism or questions. Let's say we can begin with the gentleman in the front.
Thank you. Steve Winters, independent consultant. I guess to direct us to the speaker, Dr. Köse. Now, I'm not an expert on Libya, but coming from a perspective of DC, and when you talk about Africa, including the northern part, everybody's talking about some major global competition for resources, China versus, say, US and the West. And obviously, Libya played some kind of role in this because we had 30,000 Chinese who had to be evacuated out of the country, which is probably all the ones that were there, that might have been involved in various oil projects. And the argument at the time was this whole issue, who's going to get the oil of Libya, and we're not going to let China get it, or including now. So you didn't, I just wondered if any of these people you talked to over there on the ground are still sort of remembering that larger perspective, and assuming whoever were to be this government of the future, are the Chinese coming back in, or is this going to be some kind of Western agreement? No, we don't want the Chinese back in.
Thank you for your question. Dr. Köse, you may respond.
Yeah, I mean, actually, nobody particularly mentioned about Chinese influence and Chinese investment. There is huge, actually, Western influence. I mean, Italy, France, still these oil companies, and Russia really wants to get into more into project in Libya. So the company, I mean, Chinese companies usually try to avoid war conditions. So they, I mean, in Security Council, they have particular perspective, but they don't want to be part of these civil wars. But there is still ongoing competition between Italian, French, and Russian influences in that context, I think, which is complicating the civil war situation. So yes, we have the political competition on the face, but behind the scenes, there is also involvement of these oil companies, Total, the Russian companies. I think, but this may be also a source of consensus. I mean, if we bring all these actors, have some kind of separation of the project or division, this ambiguity may turn into potential for developing new projects in Libya. Otherwise, they will continue to fight or support, fighting, different factions. So this is an important element of the ongoing confrontation in Libya, and it has to be handled whether front or behind.
Yeah, the only sign of the Chinese presence we had in the last 4 or 5 years was their attempt to bid for the furnishing new electrical central and couldn't do it because they did not manage well the fact that there was a government that was limited to Tripoli. They could not go to where the power stations were, and so they withdrew rapidly.
Okay, next question, please, Professor.
Daniel Serwer, I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins. Professor at Johns Hopkins Science. I haven't heard enough about the violent extremists. Where are they now? Who are they? Who's supporting them? Why should I worry about them? I remember, of course, Cerne is one of the hot spots, but does Haftar clean that out? I'm not sure. CERT was a problem. Has that been cleaned up by the Misratans? Where are these guys? Who are they? And how important are they in the global scheme of things?
Thank you for your question. Mr. Would you like to respond?
I can take it. ISIS has been defeated badly. They ran into the desert and became what we call a normal terrorist organization without any attachment to particular territory. They are roaming the problems between the Tebu, the Tuareg, and the stuff. They are trying to insert themselves into these diatribes, into the smuggling. It is, to open a parenthesis, extremely difficult now to really individuate ISIS, Al-Qaeda, other jihadists from the criminal organizations. I've been telling, for a long time, be careful, because the criminal organizations are the real power in Libya. They're becoming extremely powerful, and they are absorbing, for their interests, some of these guys who have been kicked out from Sirte, from Derna, or stuff, and using them as expert soldiers or expert. Then these people would use this collaboration with the criminal organization to help them maintain the same result, which is that of weakening the state or forbidding the formation of a state. Do you remember 3 years ago there was the attack by a terrorist organic group in Sliten? When there was the Academy of the Coast Guard. That they were giving the graduation of 100 of these Coast Guard, and this truck entered into and blew up and killed 40 of these cadets. It was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. There was a clear signal that the terrorists did not want the state, but they proved that it was a criminal organization that furnished the truck, the explosive, and the stuff, because there is a common interest in impeding the state to be there, to form. So nobody can really tell you where is ISIS, where is Al-Qaeda, because it is so intermingled, so stuck in a sense with the criminal organization and the local groups that it's very hard. The only thing is that there is no territorial conquest by ISIS. There is no village or city that is under their control. They are very mobile if they are, and fighting on one side of the Aulad Sliman, on one side of the Tebu, according to whatever happens.
What should I worry about?
Because in a state of confusion as it is, it takes very little to exploit cleavages that are going to come. I'm sure that, give you an example, in Tripoli, Bashar has done a great job in using part of the various militias as security forces and having them penetrate the various neighborhoods and individuate what are the strange elements. And they captured a lot of the sleeping cells, a lot of people who ran away from Sirte, who were there doing they were doing a good job in taking care of criminals and terrorists at the same time. Now that all these troops have been moved away from the internal police checking and are at the front fighting, you create the opportunity for the criminal organization to form in a total state of anarchy, so in perfect security because nobody's watching, the instrument to destabilize completely the nascent state or anyhow to do that. This is just one example. The same thing is happening in Morzuk, it's happening in every other place. When the forces are supposed to fight them are busy somewhere else because of other cleavage or other action, they flourish. Ample spaces are being created for them to act. Spaces that were being closed before.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Please.
One thing, I mean, still similar to the Iraqi experience, there is potential for regime loyalists to reorganize some of these extremist groups. So even if some order is established, if it's possible in Libya in the coming period, so they may engage in some of these extremist organizations. We don't know to what extent. Some actors for revenge politics may turn into extremists. So there's still the ambiguity there, as there is potential, and also the southern border coming from Mali, from Chad. So there is also potential there because those areas are not well protected. So, but this is not a major thing. If you look at the narrative of the western part of the Libya, they consider this Madkhali Salafi organization as source of extremism. So we have two different narratives. So what we hear is mostly when we talk about, when we ask about extremism, we hear about DAESH in Sirte, some minor groups, but what they mostly focus is on this Madkhali Salafis. They argue that they killed religious scholars and moderate understanding. So there is such a complaint. So I think we don't have a complete unified story or discourse about extremism, but the potential is also, like in the case of the Iraq, there is also some potential in the future.
Thank you very much for your answer. Let's proceed with the gentleman on the third row.
Hi, Alexander Shrecki. I'm from American University School of International Service. My question mainly deals with what happens after Haftar dies, because he is very sickly. He has been flying to and from France, not as recently, but back and forth for various operations and surgeries. Do Italy and France change their allegiance to whoever comes out of the collapse of the Libyan National Army as part, because their general strategy, from what I understand, is supporting that faction because of their larger strategic or political strategy of having the frontier of Europe being at the Niger River in terms of stopping migrants. And that's the reason why they've been supporting the LNA, and besides, of course, the economic concerns, but they see it as the only force that's able to kind of stop migrants.
France support Haftar. Italy is behind Sarraj.
Italy, that's what I mean, yeah. do they switch their allegiance to someone else?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mizrahi, please.
Thank you. No, you know, after Haftar, it's a crystal ball answer. After Haftar dies, as I was saying, you can have somebody else being supported by the same foreign powers who takes control, and since he's different, he can deal with the Miserati and negotiate, and good things can happen for that. Or the RNA might collapse. If the RNA collapse, then every option is possible, from a direct Egyptian intervention to support the forces who are guaranteeing the security of their border, to an internal war within the East. Any possibility is happening. So it depends how Haftar dies. If there is time for the appointment and the strengthening of, which I think it's already been undergone. I'm sure that neither the Egyptian nor the Emirati are going to be caught unprepared as they did a year ago in case of the sudden defiance of Haftar. Either he loses his face or he has a heart attack or something. They are going to have somebody, they will try at least to maintain the cohesion of whatever is called the LNA for as long as it takes to negotiate a solution with the opposition and a step forward. That is the only scenario that can open up various possibilities.
Shall we proceed? Yeah, please, gentlemen. Yeah.
Thank you. Stanley Kober. The Arab Spring, of which the Libyan revolution was a part, started as a result of economic distress. The young guy in Tunisia who committed suicide. Reference has been made to the economics here. You can't counter the violent extremism unless the people's hopes for prosperity and improved life are satisfied. There was one brief comment on this about the need to diversify the economies away from natural resources. I wouldn't disagree with that. I don't know anyone who would. It's very difficult to do under these circumstances. But there is another problem. Where does the demand come from? Look at the global economy right now. I don't see how these countries, Libya included, can prosper unless they can export to Europe. You look at a map, where will the demand, they're not going to sell to each other. Where do they sell the products, even if they achieve the diversified economies? Given what's going on in Europe now with their economies, is that realistic? If not, what is the alternative? I go to meetings like this, people talk about supply, the diversified economy, we're going to do this, but to whom do you sell?
Yes. Thank you very much for your question. Dr. Köse, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for the time being, for the Gaddafi period, basically the system was not based on enterprise of any kind. So everybody is sponsored by state, and everybody is kept at the same level. So I think there is potential for internal development and investment for Libya in terms of both natural gas, other forms of energy and oil, and also even for the tourism. So, and agriculture, there is potential. So, but all of them needs external investment as well as expertise. So it is unlikely any external investor or external actor will transfer. So our strategy recommendation in the report was based on supporting the SMEs and creating some ecosystem for SMEs. So financial ecosystem, their connection, and also, you know, it is very difficult to initiate manufacturing. That's right. I mean, Libya may be very small in terms of scale in manufacturing, but Africa, I mean, maybe so we know that Africa has also potential. So some of the, we have seen a huge, you know, metal factory in around Misrata. So, you know, this, these kind of factories especially may be useful for the African development, but still, we don't know the stability of the African economies as well. But even for its internal development, if everything goes stable, Libya has potential and may attract, investors as well as some people to work from Tunisia. So because Tunisians, even from people from the Chad, are interested to come and work in Libya. So I think main opportunity for Libya is not based on the export, but it is internal development. There's huge potential for building roads, infrastructure, and also creating some SME ecosystem. So most of the, of course, natural gas, oil will be important, and even, agricultural terms, there is huge potential. But I think the internal development is prior for that, and this can only be facilitated through providing some expertise and training within the Libyans. So nobody, no big actor will be interested to invest in agriculture in Libya. They may come and invest in oil sector, natural gas, but for the other things, for the small and medium enterprises, I think it is necessary to strengthen the local actors. So in terms of external investment, still the only option seems to be energy sector rather than the rest.
Dr. Mizran, would you like to add something?
No, I agree. The short and the medium term is going to be oil. There's no way around it. The income of oil, and then how this oil, the income of this oil is reinvested in society. That's where the trick is. Are you getting the income of oil and then trying to create the SMEs, the trade possibilities, or you just simply squander them around, as they're doing now? That's the real.
Let's proceed with the final question in the back.
Henry Hedger, researcher at NARA. I wondered, you have the precedents of Yugoslavia having a great deal of strife, and it finally broke up into several new nations. Is this a possibility for Libya? You mentioned it as a thought, but if the strife continues on for another 5-10 years, the number of people that would be killed can't be worth the result of, a unification by force. What are your feelings on one way or the other? Is it better to follow the Yugoslav example, or is it in the interests of the people of Libya to have a single nation?
Thank you for your question, Dr. Mizran.
I believe in a single state. I believe in a single nation, Libya, with a strong decentralization system. I don't believe in federalism. I don't believe in those nations. But you are right on one thing. If the situation on the ground continues, and Haftar doesn't make it, so its troops are withdrawn, you can have a de facto partition of the country. That is what I'm beginning to conceive, that at a certain point, the Western forces will be strong enough to push back the Eastern, and they will stay in their own part, looking at each other. Will not be a formal, because I don't see the United Nations or the international community recognizing to Libya, at least not in the short or medium term. So there will be a de facto two governments. One will be recognized by Cairo, by Moscow, therefore it will open trade, it will open the possibility to sell oil, and the other one will manage what it has and will go. That's something that I see potentially possible. Not likely to happen, but it's really possible. I don't see a sitting down of a commission to discuss the federalism. That's not going to happen.
One thing I would like to, the weak states are always vulnerable and dependent. So it's a kind of quasi-colonial kind of relationship. Unfortunately, we see similarities in other parts. So if it is fragmented, Libya will stay like fragmented, we will see similar situation in Libya. It will not be strong enough to control itself, and it will be like a quasi-colonial actor, which it's enticing opportunities, economic opportunities.
It will be dominated by the Egyptians, by the Algerians, by the French investment, Italian. It will be that kind of relationship.
So I see no other questions here. we have maybe 2 minutes. We can perhaps give some final reflections about the issue. We left possibilities open, but any other things you want to add?
It is really a very delicate moment in this way. I was literally outraged by the lack of reaction in the international community to what happened April 4th and the following days. That really opens a big doubt in my mind on the strength of the international community, whatever that is, whatever that means, in creating a situation that could bring not only Libya, but also the other crises to a solution. And actually, since it is moving at that level, the decision power, it is getting more complicated. It's getting out of the hands of the Libyans into other hands, whose interests, whose power we don't know deeply. And so it is becoming much harder for me to see a positive solution, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is also, I mean, negative in the sense that external powers are really supporting extremism to intervene and get into affairs of Libya, unfortunately. So we know that historically it's a very moderate place, and the extremism, all these things are coming from outside, and the outsiders are trying to, use this extremism as a pretext to dominate Libya, which has huge resources. So that's really a sad thing for Libya.
All right, after these final remarks, thank you very much. Thank you for coming here. I'd like to conclude the panel. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.